often people think out of the gate that, hey, we can just hand code some of the, there's web services connectivity, we can write some scripts, we can hire a couple of developers, and we can wire these systems together pretty quickly with a couple of developers. Now, there's been a lot written over the years about the benefits of having an integration tool, an integration platform versus hand coding. Certainly in terms of maintaining that code and the longer term ROI is certainly been proven with integration solutions. Some companies think they can outsource this to a third party, and that may be a good option for you, but what you'll see is that those third party partners typically will be working with an integration platform to manage this almost as a managed service delivery mechanism. Now, Informatica, of course, the company's been in business for about 14 years. We are the independent market leader in data integration, and recently announced Informatica 9, really expanding our integration capabilities to data quality, to master data management, and a whole host of other areas. So a real breadth of solutions in the core data and application integration area. And one area that we've been investing in, what we wanted to highlight in today's presentation, is a new way of tackling cloud integration. And that way of doing it would be through a cloud service. And so I will introduce you to some of the reasons why we're seeing companies are considering a cloud approach to cloud integration. So if you're a Salesforce.com customer, and I know many of you are on today's call, or thinking about a solution like Salesforce, you're drawn to the ability to rapidly deploy, the ease of use of a software as a service, multi-tenant system, the minimal training and potentially fewer IT resources needed to get that system up and running. And then, of course, because Salesforce is multi-tenant, you're able to benefit from seamless upgrades and subscription pricing. So Informatica has followed the same path, and we've developed our own cloud integration service as well as platform that we call the Informatica Cloud. And we followed some of these same principles in truly delivering this on the web in a multi-tenant cloud style of application. And we call this, as I mentioned, the Informatica Cloud. And we really break down the cloud, as the industry does as well, into three key areas. And the primary focus today will be on the top area, which is the Informatica Cloud Services. But as it relates to SAP integration, we have a whole host of options for customers to consider when they're, depending on the approach they take with integrating that SAP back office system. So Informatica Cloud Services, we focused on some of the primary use cases we've seen for Salesforce.com integration, as well as for integrating other software as a service applications. So migrating to the system, synchronizing the system with another system in-house, being able to do some level of data quality. So we have a data quality assessment service for Salesforce. We've introduced recently some address validation capabilities, helping you validate postal directory information against a web service and moving only the correct information into the CRM system, and then replicating the data. Certainly larger organizations we work with, they want to make sure they have a real-time copy of the SaaS application data in-house for backup or compliance reasons, or also for business intelligence reporting and analysis. Informatica has also extended this to the cloud platform, where we've built bridges into the core Power Center technology to allow you to build fairly complex mappings and maplets and publish those up to be consumed in the cloud by less technical users. And we've also enabled more of our core technology to run on public cloud infrastructure. So we've certified Power Center, we've certified the Informatica Data Quality products, as well as some cloud archiving options on Amazon. So really a breadth of options when you think about cloud computing. So let's talk specifically about Salesforce. And I want to bring Ron into the conversation as well. What we've seen companies think about as they think about Salesforce integration, there's really two things to consider. And Ron, if you want to take people through some of these two options, what we're seeing and some of the differences.
Yeah, I mean, what's really neat about software as service and specifically when it comes to integrating cloud applications with on-premise systems is that the use cases seem to be pretty consistent and redundant, if you will. We see a lot of similar use cases from customer to customer. A lot of it has to do, when we're talking about Salesforce.com specifically, a lot of it has to do with master data synchronization between Salesforce and the master system of records. In this case, we're talking about SAP. So customer master being probably the most common use case where I would say upwards of 90% of the customers have that requirement. So what that does for us is that it makes our job easier to create easy-to-use, repeatable solutions that solve those specific problems. Now, there's a couple of approaches, as you can see on the slide, to solving that problem. There is the, we'll talk about the two approaches in the next slide, but at the end of the day, you can either have a business solution to the problem, meaning you could have non-technical people solve the problem because we, as the integration experts, have pre-built some solutions for you. Or you could have IT go in with the right technologies, and this is where we make the job easier by providing an easy-to-use technology where they could rapidly solve the problem.
Great. So let's talk about the business process front. Ron, you mentioned customer master as the primary use case. There's a few others on this slide. What are you seeing in both Ron Manassan as well, who's out there working, in the trenches, if you will, in a number of our accounts? What are you guys seeing as some of the other processes people want to integrate as it relates to SAP?
Yeah, I mean, obviously master data, so it's not just customer, it's pricing information, it's sales history. A lot of times you have the folks using Salesforce don't necessarily have access to the system of records, and yet having visibility into those items is crucial for the sales team or the marketing team. Opportunity to order is going the other way, and that's also a very common process that we see all the time. When you are driving an opportunity using Salesforce and the rep closes the deal, a lot of times you need to notify the ERP system that the deal is closed, so that something needs to be shipped. That's obviously one of the most common use cases we see when it comes to SAP.
Great. And Ron Manassan, which one are you going to show in the demo in a few minutes?
I'll focus on that primary use case that we're always seeing, which is the account contact master sync.
Awesome. Okay, so we talked about two approaches to SAP integration, and this is also the case with other enterprise applications. Today's focus is clearly on SAP, but we work with customers all the time. They may have JD Edwards, they may have PeopleSoft or Oracle e-Business. I guess those are all Oracle, but other enterprise applications. And what we're seeing is really two styles of integration that the customer may take. And some customers will consider both and actually implement both. We actually worked with David Linthicum. He published a white paper on this topic, and we'll point you to that after the discussion. So the first that we'll talk about, what we were just referring to, is some of this more business process-centric integration, which is typically operationally focused. You generally have smaller amounts of data moving back and forth between systems. People often talk here about real-time and event-driven styles of integration. And you typically understand what those processes are. You set up some mappings, and this is run in a fairly frequent, repetitive type of way. Now, Ron, the last bullet you mentioned, kind of IT's role here. How would you define IT's role here versus staging, which we'll introduce in a second?
Yeah, so obviously when we're talking about the direct approach, you have to have IT involved. I have never heard of a company where non-IT folks have access to an SAP system, for example. So this is where the project is driven by IT. They obviously have access to SAP, and they have expertise into the integration work. In this case, we just give them the best technology to solve the problem, and one that is priced accordingly for this type of project. where the requirement really has to do with rapid deployment.
Okay, great. And then on the staging front, as you can see in the diagram, data here would then be staged in a intermediary or logical location where more complex operations would then be performed on that data before it moves into the source or moves into the target. So some of the examples here are transformations, translation of data, aggregation, cleansing, matching. So the staging approach is really ideal also for larger volumes of data that are moving. So it might be more of a batch style of requirement, but we're also seeing customers do fairly frequent, near real-time kinds of integration with staging. What are you seeing in terms of, both for Ron and Austin as well, how is this set up? How do people who have Salesforce established and work with IT on in the staging approach? What are some of the best practices you guys have seen for this style of implementation?
I mean, I would say from a business perspective, this is probably a very, very common scenario when it comes to Salesforce integration, namely because of who's doing the work. A lot of times, as you know, when it comes to SaaS and SaaS integration, the line of business is driving the project. They're the ones who brought in Salesforce into the company. Sometimes it's a tactical project. It's not rolled out to the entire company yet. So there's a lot of situations where, they're doing their own integration, and yet one or two of the key processes require access to the SAP data. In that case, the simplest and most common thing that we see happening is that the business goes and asks IT for a copy of that data, and that's made available to them via a file, or sometimes it's sent to them staged in a database for them. And then at that point, whether they have a consultant working on the project or they have their own resources doing the integration, it's pretty easy to pick up that data and do the integration on their own. You mentioned that data augmentation is a good scenario for this use case. Obviously, reporting, analytics, data warehousing are typically use cases where we see people, in the case of SAP, grabbing data out of BW, for example. Sales history is very common, and staging approach is very common for that scenario. So definitely quite a valid option, and one that we see very often.
Yeah, one other point about this particular approach, one of the things that I see a lot is that if you have the line of business or the business user that actually has changing requirements, they're not quite sure what they need. They know they need data from SAP, but they're not sure what format it needs to be in. They're potentially changing some business rules. So this approach can help there, where the IT folks can simply say, okay, I'm going to give you the data that you're requesting, putting that in that staging area, and then at that point, the line of business has some ownership of the data, but not going directly against SAP. They've got their cut of the data, and then they can do what they need to do on that data dynamically without having to constantly work back and forth with IT to get those requirements in.
So a little more flexibility here from a change management perspective.
Absolutely. So there's more flexibility, and there's clear lines of ownership on who is responsible for what.
Okay, great. And we'll share a couple of case studies with you after the demonstration.
And one last point, Darren, is that it's quite common to see people start with one way and then move to another way of solving the problem. So because of timing, a lot of companies start with the staging approach where IT just gives a file or a dump of the data. And then as the project becomes more strategic, there's more Salesforce seats in the company, then IT steps in and does a more direct integration.
And then these two approaches aren't mutually exclusive, so you could have a bit of both going, especially if there's more of a data warehousing requirement for the staging, and then more of a process-centric integration requirement.
That's a great point. That makes a lot of sense. Yeah.
So some of the questions we were talking before we got started today about asking, as you think about what approach is right for your organization. So a couple we'll just go through here, and if you want to chime in with some questions or some comments as participants, we'd love to get your input. So who has access to the production SAP system? What level of line of business or departmental or really generally self-service is needed, particularly for the folks who are running the Salesforce implementation, the CRM administrators, people creating custom fields and custom objects. What level of self-service do they need as it relates to integration? How much data are you integrating? And then what is the frequency of that data movement? As mentioned, at Informatica, we see customers running jobs throughout the day in a real-time type of fashion. We also see that a lot of those same customers will run some nightly batch jobs, or they may have IT running some batch schedules nightly or every week, and then the line of business is doing more frequent real-time style of integration. So other data sources. So we're really focusing on SAP to Salesforce integration, but what other data sources do you need to integrate? So that will impact the style of integration you consider in your organization. And then Ron mentioned the availability and skills of the IT organization or IT resources, as well as the systems integrator. So I know many of you on the phone, we have people on the call here from Informatica Professional Services. We offer some of our own professional services and training in this area, and we also have partners that we work with globally. Another topic that's coming up, and we can do a whole other webinar on this, and we might, is on governance. I think as software as a service adoption continues to grow, and IDC recently published some pretty phenomenal numbers on what they're forecasting in the next couple of years. There's a whole conversation now going on in IT around the governance. What has to change? What has to? How do things need to adapt to recognize this momentum for software as a service? So I'm going to hand the reins over to Mr. Ron Manassan, who's going to take us through a demonstration of integrating Salesforce and SAP using the Informatica Cloud. And I believe the demonstration is going to really focus on account synchronization in that use case.
Thank you, Darren. So while Informatica actually, again, as Darren has mentioned, we've had SAP Salesforce solutions for years. But what I'll be focusing on here is how we can use Informatica Cloud to deal with these use cases. Now, here in the Summer 10 Informatica Cloud release, we actually released the concept of Informatica Cloud plugins. Now, a plugin is essentially a template that either ourselves, our experts on our team, or some of our partners can go off and create pre-built templates for specific applications and business processes. Now, what we have as part of this release, we actually have 3 plugins. We've got the Account Contact Master Sync plugin, we have a Product Sync plugin, and we have a Pricing plugin. Now, what I'll be focusing this demo on is, again, that most common use case, which is Account Contact Sync between Salesforce and SAP. All right, so the actual demo that I'll be showing, I'll start off with what typically people deal with if they're just starting up with Salesforce. Right, you've got an empty Salesforce org, and you need to get some of those account contact records that are already there in your enterprise in SAP, and how do you populate that into Salesforce? So I'll be focusing on dynamically, as part of the demo, I'll create a new account record, show that data move across to Salesforce. Then I'll also create a new contact record so you can see how, even with the related objects, you can move things over and maintain relationships. But then I'll talk about in the third part of the demo, what customers really want, which is the synchronization. How do we keep data that's in multiple systems in sync with each other? So I'll go ahead and deal with some of those records that I've just moved over. I'll make changes on the Salesforce side, and then go ahead and show those changes propagated over to SAP. Okay, so go ahead and share my desktop here. All right, so we've got Salesforce open, and this is my empty demo Salesforce org. If we take a look at the Accounts tab, look at all accounts, and there's nothing in there. If we take a look at Contacts and do the same thing, there's no records. All right, so again, I'm going to use, for this demo today, the Informatica Cloud to do the integration between the two systems. So being a cloud-based offering, I stay here inside of the browser, and I'm pointing to the Informatica Cloud website. And I'm simply going to log in with my demo credentials. Okay, so Informatica Cloud has multiple offerings. We've got some synchronization capabilities for regular on-premise to cloud offerings, replication, data quality, data assessment, loading tools. But I'll be focusing on those plugins that I discussed earlier. So these two components represent the account contact plugins, where we've got one direction, SAP to Salesforce, and then, of course, the other direction, Salesforce to SAP. So I'm going to go ahead and start up the SAP to Salesforce task here. It's currently running. Let's go ahead now into SAP. Let's create a new customer and show that data move across. All right, so I've got the SAP screen up now, and
looks great.
Simple, easy to use. So just to keep things dynamic, Darren, why don't you just go ahead and give me a company name, and I'll just type this out.
Acme.
Acme Corp. All right, Acme Corp. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to create this record. Let me go ahead and save that. Now, this will take a few seconds here. Our SAP instance is configured to do a bunch of validation. But what essentially is going to be happening here during this process is, as this record is being saved, we will utilize something that's known as SAP iDocs. So for all of you SAP folks that are out there, I know you know what I'm talking about. But these records are going to be populated, and the data will be packaged in the iDocs. And what the Informatica Cloud plugin is actually doing is it's reading from those iDocs as they're being processed and sent over, and it will dynamically go ahead and populate that data into Salesforce. So as soon as we see this record go ahead and validate and be saved, we'll go ahead and into Salesforce and see that Acme Corp record populated. It'll only take a few more seconds.
I'm mesmerized by the dripping water on the top right of the screen. Okay.
Almost done. There it is. Okay, so now if we go back to Informatica Cloud, and we see that it's still running, and we should see this row count jump up to 1. And once that's done, we'll go ahead and take a look at Salesforce, and we'll see that record created. All right, so it's updated to 1. Let's switch back to Salesforce. We refresh on all accounts, and we see our record for Acme Corp. Cool. And you see, as part of the plugin, we've also created some custom fields in the account object. So this is how we'll be able to do the synchronization back if we do need to make changes. And again, I'll demo those changes on the Salesforce side, propagating over to SAP in just a second. But let me go to the second part of the demo, which is let's load some contact records for that new customer in SAP. All right, so let's go back in to SAP, and let's go to the contact person screen here. And let's add 2 names. So let me go ahead and add myself. And Darren, I'll go ahead and add you. Okay. Coming down. Okay, so let's go ahead and save this. All right, so let's go back to Informatica Cloud. And we'll see the record count increase, and we're going to basically be doing the updates back on the account and contact objects. So we'll see that row count jump up here. Okay, so now let's go back into Salesforce and do a refresh on the screen. And we'll see the 2 new contact records populated. So again, we've loaded into the contact object, and again, we are still in the account record. So you see, not only do we populate the 2 records, but we've also properly parented them so the relationships remain intact. Okay, so now let's go to the third part of the demo. Right, you've got data now both in SAP and in Salesforce, and it's very common, especially for account contact information, that there are certain fields that you will want your sales reps or your customer service folks to be able to update inside of Salesforce, because they're the ones talking to the customers on an ongoing basis. And you'll want to have those data changes propagated back into SAP. So what I'll do here is, let's say this number has been changed, the company changed their phone number. Let's change this to the Informatica phone number. It's 385-5000. Okay, so if we go back and take a look at the SAP record, we'll see that on the SAP side, again, it's 555-5555. So let's go ahead and make the save on the Salesforce side. And let's move this data over into SAP. So to do that, I go back into Informatica Cloud, and let's use the other part of the Informatica Cloud plugin, which is the Salesforce to SAP sync. So we're going to go in the other direction. I'm going to go ahead and run this. And again, we'll see the row count jump up, and this one will actually go ahead and complete here in just a second. Now, what we're doing, for those of you that are SAP folks, in this case, we're actually writing to the BAPI to load into the context.
And just as a quick reminder, people can type in questions along the way. I'm sure there's some that are coming to mind as Ron goes through this.
All right, so this is successful. So now, if we go back into SAP, take a look at this record for Acme Corp, we see that the telephone number has been changed. Again, this is a very simple example here that we've shown just to show the basics of the data moving back and forth. But again, Informatica, being the enterprise data integration leader, has been dealing with some of SAP's largest integration projects. And now we've been able to enable cloud customers and the Informatica Cloud folks to be able to do this quickly and easily.
So you've been going back and forth between two systems, but ultimately the big benefit here is that you don't have to do that, right? I mean, as a user, say I'm a sales rep, I live in Salesforce, I never have to go in and do any of this stuff over in SAP. But as any of those changes happen in either system, you'll know about it.
Absolutely. So this would be a set and forget system once everything is tested and up and running, where this would just automatically be happening in the background. Of course, Informatica Cloud, as well as all the other Informatica products, have the full notification capabilities in case something does go wrong. But this really is going to be one of those set and forget. Once you've got everything up and running, the data will just start moving back and forth.
So why don't, I know some of the people on the phone have been familiar with Informatica's capabilities. You know, Informatica's been integrating with SAP since 1998, and all kinds of BW and IDOC and certifications. Can you spend a minute on the Informatica Cloud interface? Because some of that might be newer for people on the phone. What else should people know about the Informatica Cloud?
So we just focused for this demo on the Informatica Cloud plugins. But really, there are multiple capabilities that Informatica Cloud has. We have something here that we call the data synchronization capability inside of Informatica Cloud. And this allows somebody that is a non-technical user or somebody that's not necessarily an integration person the ability to move data back and forth between Salesforce and other on-premise systems.
And Ron, as you're going through this, we are getting a couple of good questions coming in. So just as you go through it, can you explain the technical details involved in integration and how Cloud Informatica is connecting to SAP and where it is behind the firewall? So maybe a little bit about how that works.
Sure.
And then we'll come back to some other questions about specifically on the SAP process integration.
Yeah, actually, let me bring up the lead-in slide to talk a little bit about architecture, because I'm sure that is something that everybody's curious about. You're talking about Informatica Cloud, SAP is behind the firewall. How exactly is all of this stuff working? So let me describe that real fast, because I'm sure that's top of mind for everybody that's on the call. Okay, so let me go back to the presentation.
So on Informatica Cloud website. Sure.
Okay. All right, so at a high level, this is going to be fine from an architecture standpoint, but if you take a look, you've got Informatica Cloud that's available out here. You've got Salesforce.com that's out in the cloud, but this square box represents a company, and the square box really represents the firewall. Now, as part of Informatica Cloud's architecture, there is a component that we call the secure agent. It's a small downloadable component, about 85 megabytes in size, that is, once it's installed behind a computer behind the firewall, it's self-updating and self-upgrading. So once it's there, you never have to worry about it again. It's part of our, 3 to 4 times a year upgrades. Everything is managed automatically as far as that agent goes. Now, being that it's behind the firewall, it has access to the local on-premise systems that are there. So not only would we be able to connect to a local SAP instance, again, we're just going to do that through the standard protocols, transport protocols, TCP/IP, and so forth, to access SAP, local databases, local file systems, anything that's behind the firewall. Now, what the agent does when it connects to Informatica Cloud and to something, let's say, like Salesforce.com, it actually establishes outbound connections to the cloud apps that are there. Now, that's very important because you don't have to open up ports in the firewall. Being that they're outbound connections, as long as you have access to the internet from that machine and can make HTTPS calls, so it's all through SSL, everything will work. So once that's there, again, the agent's behind the firewall. It's establishing connections outbound for security reasons, but being behind the firewall, that's how we'll get access to SAP.
Now, there's also a question about, which I think is more speaks to the mappings that are done. How would you manage conflict of the same contact updated simultaneously, both in SAP and Salesforce?
So we do have some default conflict resolution rules built into our plugins, but that is something that would be very customer specific about what is the master on one side and what's the master on the other, and what are those rules. So those are things that we either can work with you if you're leveraging the Informatica Cloud plugins to customize them for your needs, or if you had access to the actual Informatica Cloud platform itself, you would be able to, if you were, let's say, an IT person that had access to SAP, you'd be able to define what those rules are using the Informatica Cloud platform, and that's, again, what most of the very large SAP integration projects that have been done over the years, that's what they've been using. So
okay.
all sorts of capabilities there.
Awesome. So let's switch gears and dive into a couple of other case studies, and maybe some of these other questions that are coming in will be answered in that section. But great job, Ron. So I'm going to need you to change the arrow so I can move the slide forward. Sure. Okay. So Informatica, as I mentioned, has a long history of working closely with SAP customers, and we have a long history of really working with Salesforce customers as well. In fact, I like this quote that was first when the two companies formed a partnership early on. Mark Benioff noted that our partnership with Informatica represents a very strategic relationship for our customers, ensuring they can manage and share all of their enterprise data and information on demand. And speaking of Salesforce customers, now Informatica has over 1,000 Salesforce customers working with us for various styles of integration. And really, that's why we talk about, as it relates to SAP, we want to encourage you to think about which approach makes the most sense for you, and then we'll certainly work with you on prescribing the right solution for your specific requirements. But we've been doing a lot and seeing a continued momentum, partnering with Salesforce, really working on driving customer success and adoption of the Salesforce system, whether it's the CRM applications or the Force.com platform. And we're seeing a growing need to integrate the back office with the Salesforce solution. So let's talk about a couple of case studies that kind of represent the different styles. So this is an interesting one, European customer that we've been working with, and also one of our partners has really driven the implementation for, where they had some typical business process requirements. Their users needed to be enabled to create and maintain accounts. The SAP master data needed to stay in sync, and certain controls and rules needed to be obeyed, similar to what Ron went through in his demonstration. And every time a CRM contact and account was viewed, all related order history, as well as current financial status, needed to be visible in real time. So here is a solution from Informatica where we delivered real-time bidirectional synchronization with the Informatica platform. And again, this speaks to our heritage with very strong connectivity options and all kinds of certifications for SAP. And we're seeing a lot of benefits here, and the partner has also, again, given us all kinds of feedback. We work closely with them to make sure that we're driving mutual success in this account. Another one similar was interesting. This is really a pure Informatica Cloud service implementation from another global manufacturer, and this was driven less from the IT side, who had been using Informatica and SAP for some time, but the lines of business were moving aggressively towards Salesforce, and they wanted to have more of a stage. Well, they didn't necessarily call it stage, but they wanted to have access to some elements of SAP. In this case, it was SAP BW, to be able to do more holistic reporting and provide broader visibility to their sales team as they adopt the CRM system. And they didn't want to wait for accounts receivable data in SAP BW reports. So this was a solution where they did set up a staging environment, and they've really broadened as a result of these hooks into SAP. They've seen tremendous growth in their CRM adoption. Another interesting point here is that they're also doing some direct connectivity to a third-party data provider, bringing in that third-party data into their Salesforce system. So showing that, of course, we can do the SAP integration, but we also have broader endpoints that we can work with our customers. And this is a case study one of our customers presented recently at a CloudForce event in Australia. And they actually went through some of their screens, similar to what Ron showed a moment ago. Some of these fields, it's kind of hard to look at them, so we built in some of these callouts. But these fields of customer case history, ownership records, service history, and activities on account, all were bringing in data from the back office system into the Salesforce environment. So again, keeping your users in the system they know, not making them required to go out and access information through another system or go to somewhere else to get access to this information. So better visibility and, again, broader adoption of Salesforce in the company. Now, behind the scenes, this was also an account where we've worked with one of our partners, and we've seen tremendous success in this implementation, doing some pretty innovative things with the Informatica platform. So the bottom line, and again, we do want to have some open discussion, get your questions, whether business or technical in nature. Informatica, independent data integration market leader, over 1,000 Salesforce implementations, and over 500 SAP implementations. Some of the processes we went through, we see customer master really being a driver, but also product master. A lot of Salesforce customers want to see order history. That might be more of a mashup style of integration, or they want to do opportunity to order. So when something closes in the back office system, that should be reflected in the opportunity and account view for the sales team. Another point I wanted to highlight is a direction we're going, and Ron showcased some of the plugins that we've developed for SAP. Now, we really want to work with our partners, and we continue to do so around what we're calling the Informatica Marketplace. So you can go and visit informaticamarketplace.com, and you can see there's about 18 different plugins currently available for the Informatica Cloud. And we want to work with our partners or developers, consultants, people who have a lot of this domain and industry expertise to continue to build out these plugins so that our customers can benefit from prepackaged integration. So if they know that they have a specific process that they need integrated, they can go to the marketplace, look for it, and it can get implemented quickly by Informatica, or again by our partners. So the marketplace is a really exciting area that we're really building out in the second half of this year, and we'll be showcasing some of the solutions that are delivered on the marketplace at Informatica World, which is in November in Washington, D.C. So a lot of things going on in the second half of the year around marketplace and Informatica World. So let's shift into some discussion. We have a few minutes left. Again, I encourage you to add questions into the panel. We've seen some back and forth happening with our folks here. There's a question here, is one plugin enough for multiple integrations like account sync, contact sync, etc.? And Ron, why don't I let you take all of those kinds of questions?
So, I hate these kind of answers, but I'll give it anyway. It depends. So definitely let's talk and reach out and hear what your details are, and then we can definitely let you know, based off of your use case, what would be required. But generally speaking, again, something like SAP and Salesforce, it's of course it's a very common thing for people to have lots of customization done on both the Salesforce and SAP side. So definitely if this is something of interest to you, reach out to us. We can talk about your detailed environment and use case and figure out what would make sense.
So if there's multiple plugins or processes they need to integrate, we would be able to put together a package and really work with you on what style of integration is going to make most sense, whether it's direct or staged style of approach. And to that point, we do have a white paper just published this week. Again, David Linthicum, who's a well-known industry thought leader. It's called Salesforce and SAP Integration, Best Practices, Approaches, and Technology. We will provide that to registrants and attendees following today's discussion. Other questions or wrong topics? Let me put you on the spot. What else should people know about as they think about SAP integration with Salesforce?
Yeah, I think the main thing is a lot of folks that have SAP don't think that the cloud is an option for solving the problem. And a lot of people talk about security being a showstopper for SaaS or for cloud. And I think it's important to understand that the way we've architected our cloud integration with the concept of a secure agent, the data really never moves into the Informatica Cloud, if you will, right? It goes directly between your SAP system and, in this case, Salesforce. So it's a very secure architecture and one that has been fleshed out, if you will, by many security experts in some of the largest enterprises that we deal with.
Great. And then in terms of technology approaches, we've talked a lot about Informatica Cloud. We've also noted that Informatica has very strong native connectivity options. Some people have asked about Power Exchange. So there's certainly a breadth of ways we can tackle the problem, whether cloud-based or based on-premise. A lot of it's going to depend on the complexity of requirements, on the desire or need for things to be cloud-based or hosted or living on-premise. So these are things we would work with you on, and we can certainly set up some follow-on discussion after today's presentation. Yeah,
this is very much of a hybrid world out there, and a lot of times, especially existing customers, assume that, it has to be one way or the other. If I have Power Center, I have no need for cloud integration. And that's not the case. We have many, many existing customers that are using both types of technologies. Each one has its strengths and weaknesses, and each one has a place in the overall picture. So we do have quite a few customers that are using Power Center for certain processes and using the cloud service to solve other processes that are mainly driven from the business side.
Great. Well, I think that's a good way to lead things. Some contact information here on the screen. We encourage you to visit informaticacloud.com if you want to dig into more of what we offer as a cloud service. And we will be providing you with the links to the presentation and the recording. And I'd like to thank Ron for a great demo, and Ron for joining me to have the conversation. And we look forward to working with you. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. This does conclude today's conference call. You may now disconnect.